If you're a millennial or a Gen Z, there is a great risk that you suffer from a particular mental disease. One that has the potential to destroy your life and the lives of everyone around you. And the ironic thing is that it's a condition that tends to hit the empathetic, soft, impressionable mind. The cynics, on the other hand, are not in danger from catching this. I'm talking about what I refer to as Pocahontas Syndrome or Narcissistic Altruism. We've all heard it a billion times. You have to follow your heart. You have to do what feels right. Now in this video, I'm going to tell you why this is complete bullshit. Why not only does it not improve your life, it actually holds you back on a number of aspects, it's immoral, and it destroys your surroundings. Now first, I'm going to tell you what Pocahontas Syndrome is exactly and how it fucks you up. Then I'm going to show you how this disease spreads. And by showing you some clips from the movie Pocahontas, I'm going to demonstrate why it makes perfect sense to call it Pocahontas Syndrome. And you'll see why it is actually more accurate to regard this movie as a psychological thriller or horror movie than a children's movie. So what is Pocahontas Syndrome? Well, first of all, I also sometimes call it Narcissistic Altruism, a name that actually expresses a little more clearly what it is that we're talking about here. Okay, so a person who suffers from this is characterized by the following. First of all, the person acts according not to principle or reason, but to whatever leads to immediate emotional satisfaction. Second point is that even when seemingly taking responsibility for his or her own actions, the person doesn't do it out of principle, but only really when it aligns with immediate emotional satisfaction. And the last and probably most important point, while doing all of these things, the person suffering from Pocahontas Syndrome maintains the illusion that he or she is morally superior and acting according to a higher value system than other people. Now let's look at why I call it this. The thing is, if you want to see toxic behavior, you just have to watch Disney's Pocahontas from 1995. If you haven't watched it or forgot what it's about, in extremely brief terms, it's about a Native American chieftain's daughter, Pocahontas, who basically engages in a love triangle with two men, one man from her tribe, Cocoam, whom her father wants her to marry, and this soldier slash scout, John Smith, traveling with a group of British colonizers searching for gold. Now throughout the entire story, Pocahontas struggles with the internal conflict over whether she should settle down, take her rightful place beside her father, whether she should adhere to the norms and practices of her people, or whether she should choose her own path. Now all of that is essentially pretty interesting. The movie is relatively well done and the themes are kind of interesting, especially for children. Because up until a certain point, the movie basically just presents this internal struggle between individualist pursuit of happiness and whether an individual should subdue itself to the demands of the collective. Now of course, Pocahontas doesn't want to marry the one her father picked for her, fair enough, but instead engages in a love affair with this guy Smith. So let's look at where this story jumps off the rails. And I'll show you why Pocahontas as a character is completely insane and frankly pretty dark.
Cocoam! No! Cocoam! Leave him alone! Cocoam! Stop!
Both eyes open.
Okay, so what do we see here? There's then an incident where Smith and Pocahontas, they meet, kiss, Cocoam follows her, and of course attacks Smith. And this guy, one of Smith's friends, saves his life by shooting Cocoam. All of this results in Cocoam dying, and Smith being arrested for the murder, and he's now basically waiting to be executed. And where do we find Pocahontas? Let's take a look. So again, look at this. Smith is being brought in front of the chieftain. He's been arrested, right? Listen to what the guy is saying here.
Pocahontas was out in the woods. Cocoam went to find her, and this white man attacked them.
Our weapons are strong, but now our anger is stronger. At sunrise, he will be the first to die.
And look, literally a moment later, Pocahontas is right there. And she just heard this other guy saying that Smith was the aggressor. I mean, you can't blame the tribe for wanting him arrested and executed, since they pretty much believe that he committed a violent murder on one of their own. Pocahontas, on the other hand, knows that this isn't true, but she doesn't say anything. Does she immediately explain to her father that the whole thing was her fault, that Cocoam attacked Smith, and that he was therefore acting in self-defense, and all of those other details of the story that any completely sane sane, decent, moral and responsible being would immediately do. No, she remains completely silent. And let's take a look at the next scene. So when her father reprimands her, what does she say? Look at this.
You disobeyed me. You have shamed your father.
I was only trying to help.
So yeah, this is where narcissism, of course, comes into the picture. Because while not taking any responsibility, she keeps trying to convince everybody else, including herself, that all of her actions were something she did to help others. Something which we know isn't true. Like literally all the rest of the movie is about her, her needs, her desires, her looking to find her own way, right? Literally nothing she does for the entire movie is for anybody else than herself. So she's basically like a child trying to justify her actions rather than taking pure responsibility. Now look at this completely crazy scene which takes place a moment after, where she talks to her friend. Take a look at this.
After you. I was worried about you. I thought I was doing the right thing. All this happened because of me. And now I'll never see John Smith again.
Okay, Jesus fucking Christ, this guy is right in there, sitting in the tent, still alive. I mean, you can still save him. Literally, the only thing you have to do is tell the truth. But instead, she's just sacrificing him like that, never even considering taking actual responsibility. Even if she wasn't sure that the truth was gonna save this guy Smith, it would make a lot of sense to try, since you know the truth and nobody else does, right? Okay, then take a look at this scene. A moment later, she's visiting Smith in the tent, which by now just seems like a sick, psychopathic thing to do, right?
Pocahontas wants to look into the eyes of the man who killed Kocoum.
Pocahontas.
I'm so sorry.
For what? This? I've gotten out of worse scrapes than this. Can't think of any right now, but...
It would have been better if we'd never met. None of this would have happened.
Pocahontas, look at me. I'd rather die tomorrow than live 100 years without knowing you.
Pocahontas,
I can't leave you.
You never will. No matter what happens to me.
And wow, Smith just comforts her. He doesn't even ask her to maybe, I don't know, tell the truth and save me from being executed tomorrow. So again, next scene, Pocahontas is now visiting this spiritual guide character, Mother Willow.
They're going to kill him at sunrise, Grandmother Willow.
You have to stop them.
Okay, perfect. So the guide tells Pocahontas to save Smith. Seems like a pretty straightforward piece of advice. A piece of advice that we apparently have to visit a 200-year-old magical tree to get. And what is Pocahontas' response? Take a look.
I can't.
Child, remember your dream.
I was wrong, Grandmother Willow. I followed the wrong path. I feel so lost.
I can't, I was wrong, I followed the wrong path. So when Pocahontas says I was wrong, she doesn't mean I did something immoral, she doesn't mean I was wrong to sacrifice everyone around me for the sake of my own immediate emotional satisfaction. No, she means I was wrong because I didn't know my own path, right? So again, Pocahontas basically just makes it all about herself, about her emotional needs. And she portrays it as if the reason why she can't do anything is because she hasn't found the right path. While of course, none of this has anything to do with following your own path. No, it's about admitting that you fucked up and then taking responsibility for your actions. And that being said, let's take a look at the most messed up scene in the entire movie. Take a look.
The compass. Spinning arrow.
It's the arrow from your dream.
I was right. It was pointing to him. Sunrise.
It's not too late, child. Let the spirits of the earth guide you. You know your path, child. Now follow it.
Yeah, this scene pretty much says it all. So this is where it becomes absolutely clear why we call it Pocahontas Syndrome. Let's take a look at the facts. So Pocahontas is prepared to sacrifice everyone around her. Two armies are about to go to war with each other, and a man is about to be executed. An innocent man is about to be executed. Now, these two armies, of course, except for this guy who's only looking to take advantage of the situation to get the gold, these two armies are both pursuing pretty legitimate goals. So the Native Americans believe they're protecting themselves and find this confirmed because they believe that this guy brutally murdered this guy. Now the British, well, they basically go to war because they believe that these guys kidnapped this guy. And the truth is, nobody except Pocahontas knows anything about what happened. And instead of doing anything, look, she's sitting somewhere else whining like a little girl to her spiritual guide about how terrible it is for her that she hasn't found her path yet. Until...
I was right. It was pointing to him.
Meaning that she realizes that she is actually in love with Smith, that he is a part of her path. Then she decides to do something. Then she decides to throw herself between Smith and her father and stops the two armies from fighting. Beautiful, this is the climax of the movie. And at the same time, it is sort of portrayed as if she is somewhat morally superior to the two armies, as if she follows some higher principle or adheres to some deeper truth. Because of course, she's throwing herself in between them, stopping the armies from fighting, while all of these other guys are of course just a bunch of savages fighting each other. And that is how this mental disease spreads. Like, thousands of young boys and girls have watched this movie, and not a single time in the movie are we confronted with any critical approach to Pocahontas. The movie is pure manipulation and propaganda, because instead Pocahontas is portrayed as this strong, independent female character, and a somewhat wise character who of course lectures Smith and the viewer about how everything in nature is connected and the circle of life and all that kind of crap. She's portrayed as if she's a moral character who saves everybody in the end and rises above herself, and of course the savages who are all just seeking to fight each other. Like, it is literally one of the primary messages of the movie that everyone else than Pocahontas are a bunch of savages, while Pocahontas is this wise, independent, morally superior, morally just character who's actually the only one that can actually see the truth, the only one who can sort of rise above all the savagery, which, as we just saw a moment ago, is complete and utter bullshit. Like, literally all she did in the entire movie was to gamble with other people's lives in the pursuit of her own narrow, short-term, immediate emotional satisfaction. Throughout the entire movie, she, as a pure narcissist, is completely prepared to allow everyone else to suffer the brutal consequences of her fuck-ups. At no point at all does she take responsibility, speak the truth, or stand by her own actions. Until, of course, when she luckily realizes that it is in her immediate emotional self-interest to do so. And so of course she decides to play the wise, moral female hero in the end. And all the boys and girls watching that movie over and over again are bombarded with that sick and false portrayal of morality and heroism. Now, I know what you're gonna say. You always talk about the morality of selfishness or the power of self-interest in creating a better world or a better society. So in that case, what's wrong with Pocahontas? I mean, if she's basically just pursuing her own self-interest, then what's the problem? A couple of things. 3 things to be precise. First of all, when I say self-interest, I don't mean narrow, emotional, spur-of-the-moment self-interest. Not today I'll steal somebody else's money because it makes sense to me kind of self-interest. Not today I'll murder somebody who stands in the way of my own immediate emotional satisfaction kind of self-interest. It needs to be based on reason. We need to serve only those of our own interests that are based on or derived from rationality, not emotion alone. Second of all, the pursuit of self-interest is only moral if it happens within a certain value framework. In other words, only if it adheres to certain principles that must never be compromised, no matter the type of self-interest. Those principles, as you know, are of course first and foremost non-aggression and non-coercion. So it means never being the aggressor, but it also means embracing wholeheartedly the idea of taking responsibility for your own actions. It means not being prepared to deliberately sacrificing other people for your own emotional self-interests. It means not committing fraud. It means not being prepared to let other people walk into their death because of a lie that you told them or a truth that you refused to tell them. So only if you act within that value framework is the pursuit of self-interest moral and desirable. Pocahontas obviously doesn't adhere to this. And thirdly, lastly, Pocahontas Syndrome means essentially living and acting according to a lie. And this is why I choose to also call it narcissistic altruism. Now, if you've ever met a true narcissist, you'll know that the one thing that characterizes people with this disorder are is a complete inability to acknowledge their own mistakes. Narcissists will, even when seemingly recognizing their own fault, always try to twist the whole thing into something that acts as an excuse for why they did it, or something that ultimately points to the whole thing being someone else's fault. Narcissists will genuinely believe that anything that is good in their lives is good because of them alone, and everything that is bad in their lives is because of other people or circumstances plotting or working against them. That's what narcissism is. It's a lie. It's a false perception of the world. It's a false perception of yourself. Narcissistic altruism is therefore when you, on the surface, engage in self-sacrifice, but in reality you only do it because of a self-induced lie. Namely the lie that you are doing it for anyone else or for anything else than your own immediate emotional satisfaction. And just as the pursuit of self-interest has to be based on reason and has to adhere to a certain value framework, it also needs to be based on a desire to know the truth and a readiness to accept the truth about yourself when you're being confronted with it, even if the truth might disturb your self-image. Pocahontas is obviously not prepared to do this. Like, I don't have to repeat once more how dark and sick a character she is, but not only is she ready to sacrifice anyone else for her own immediate emotional self-interest, she goes through the whole thing utterly convinced that she is a moral person, that she somehow adheres to a higher morality. And the movie does nothing to convince the viewer otherwise. It does nothing to stop any young boy or girl from being indoctrinated with this sick and false perception of heroism, sacrifice, and individuality. So if you really want to watch this movie with your kids, I would suggest that you wait until they're old enough for a critical discussion afterwards, so that you might explain to them why Pocahontas could not be further from an ideal for your children to live by. So that you might explain to them the concepts of self-interest, rationality, principles, truth, and responsibility. So that you can make sure that your children will avoid catching this mental disease, or so that you might cure yourself from it. So how do you cure yourself from this mess? Well, first of all, take a look at the people around you. Start building an awareness of this. If you're a millennial or Gen Z, maybe start deconstructing all the crap your peers are saying. Every time somebody refuses to take on responsibility, listen to how they justify that. Every time somebody seemingly takes on responsibility, try to figure out if they're doing it out of an adherence to principle or reason, or if it's just virtue signaling. And you'll find that it most likely is virtue signaling. You'll find that we are dealing with a generation consisting mostly of manipulative fucks, but not Machiavellians. No, because Machiavellians, they know what they're doing. The people that I'm referring to here, the people suffering from Pocahontas Syndrome, they are manipulating themselves as well. They have no idea what the hell they're doing. And these people are pretty much everywhere, and we haven't seen the consequences yet. But once the millennial generation starts taking on most of the power positions in society, we'll start seeing the consequences. And it's not going to be pretty.